My name's Scott Snibbe. I've been studying Buddhism for about 20 years, Tibetan Buddhism, and I've been a meditation leader for about 13 years. Much of what I've learned and practiced has been at this center, Seichen Ling, which is in San Francisco. And much of it has been from its resident teacher, a profoundly skilled Tibetan Lama named Geshe Nawang Dakpa. And all of us in this tradition, including him, follow the lineage of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So today what I'm going to talk about is impermanence. It's a very timely topic. We had actually been planning to discuss this topic beforehand, but it turns out to be even more relevant than we thought. The topic is about how things change, how the external world changes, which we're seeing in stark relief right now, but also looking more intimately at things like how our body changes, how our possessions change, how our relationships change, and also how our mind changes, which is one of the deepest things you look into as a meditator. And so to start out, I'm going to do something we typically do in sessions, which is to start with a motivation. And so this is sort of a half meditative experience to try to calm yourself, sit down quietly wherever you are. And to think, why are we chatting today? Why are we thinking about these things? One way to think about it is that we'd like to calm and stabilize our minds in a time of crisis so that we can be a more effective friend and partner and parent, but also to be a good, nurturing companion to ourselves, to take care of our own minds and bodies at a stressful time, to bring a peace of mind to ourselves as a way to not just be more effective and helpful in the world, but also to stay present to the beauty of life that's still there, even during a challenging time. And also on a physical level, to take care of our body, to follow the important advice to help slow the spread of this virus, for all of us to wash our hands frequently, to avoid face-to-face gatherings of people for the time being, to help slow the spread of the COVID-19 virus and slow down and diminish the pain and the suffering that it's incurring and will incur in the world. And then also seeing the connection between our body and mind and the benefits to the body of cultivating a calm and a stable mind. A lot of the way that I get inspired in meditation is looking at science. And even from a scientific perspective, stress is considered one of the most harmful things to your body. And there are many studies that scientifically establish that stress compromises your immune system and makes you more susceptible to infection. So even on that level, cultivating a more stable, relaxed mind, even during a time of crisis, it doesn't just help you help others or help you be calm, but it can genuinely contribute to your physical health. And so that's where this contemplative tradition helps, because they give us tools to stay aware and stay engaged in the world, to be helpful and beneficial for ourselves and for others, without getting overly stressed out, without getting angry, without getting fearful, and instead cultivating our greatest human virtues of kindness, of compassion, and a focused attention on our life's experience and the people around us. So now we can move into the topic today. Today's topic is impermanence, and it's a topic that comes early in a sequence of meditations in this tradition that's called the Lam Rim. And in English, that's translated in different ways, sometimes translated as the stages of the path. And so there's a sequence of different topics that gradually move your mind towards the greatest qualities that a human being can obtain. And qualities like love, and compassion, and kindness, and generosity, patience, and joy. And in the years that I've been leading meditations, this topic of impermanence seems consistently to be one of the most beneficial and one of the most easily accessible to people. It's often one that I use if someone asks me to lead them through a meditation and they've never tried meditation before. And the goal is simple. It's to bring our mind into greater touch with the changing nature of reality. And so the Buddhist view is that the reason that we mentally suffer is that our mind is misaligned with the way things are, both in the outer reality and also in our inner reality. And what is the nature of that reality? There's many ways of looking at it, but one of the easiest to understand is that the fundamental nature of both our outer and inner reality is change. So I once actually heard a lecture by Stephen King, who I think most of you know. He's the man who wrote Carrie and The Shining and about 100 other horror novels. A lot of them have been turned into movies. And someone asked him during the Q&A part of his talk what people are most afraid of. And he didn't say serial killers or cancer, and he didn't say terrorists or earthquake or hurricane or pandemic. And he didn't even say death. And what he said was that people's greatest fear is change. He said that change itself, in all its forms, is what we fear the most. But change is the one constant in reality. The outer world's always changing, and the inner world of our mind's always changing too. And it's one of the paradoxes of Buddhism that reflecting on the uncertainty of life, the possibility of things falling apart at any minute, is seen as a path to happiness and peace of mind. And this brings peace and happiness not only because you're coming to terms with impermanence, but also because the constantly changing nature of reality offers the possibility of improvement, and offers the possibility of solving problems and of becoming happier and more present. So becoming aware of the changing nature of reality attunes you to how things truly exist. And it doesn't just bring peace of mind, but also an ability to act in the world and to affect change in your body and your mind and the outer world. We've had some big shocking moments of change over the past couple of weeks with the spread of the virus, the halting of many of our work lives, our social lives, travel, the fall of the stock market. And for most of us, moments like this rattle us and surprise us. But if you talk to someone who's been meditating daily on impermanence for years, you often find that those are the people that aren't surprised when things like this happen. And because paradoxically, by reflecting on change every day, even the worst types of change, you become more relaxed and present, and you become ready to help yourself and others when radical change inevitably occurs, like it is right now. One of the very first times I had this teaching on impermanence was a day after September 11th, 2001. And I was in Boston, and I was near Geshe Sulga, who's a great Tibetan Lama who was my brother's teacher. It was my brother who actually got me into Buddhism. And Geshe Sulga was a dear friend of our teacher here at Sechen Ling, of Geshe Dakpa. And I remember meeting them both for the first time. And they were very sweet, almost like brothers, like holding hands together during the Dalai Lama's teachings in Los Angeles. And I remember Geshe Sulga scheduled a teaching the day after September 11th to help his students process the awful news. And I was definitely one of the people shocked and surprised at that event. I definitely wasn't expecting something that awful to happen in the world. And I was really surprised at his teaching, which he did mention things like compassion, of course, but his teaching didn't focus on compassion or on like awareness that we know is, a common Buddhist teaching. But he almost solely talked about this topic of impermanence. And he began by saying how we thought that this building would be up forever, that none of us imagined that it would fall. And yet yesterday it fell, and many people died inside. And that this is something awful for the world today, and that we can open our hearts to those who are suffering and the fear that we're all experiencing. But fundamentally what he said is that this is an important lesson in impermanence, that things are always changing, and that our ingrained belief that things are stable and unchanging is false and is such a large part of what makes us suffer, and also what makes us sometimes ineffective in adapting to change and to helping others. So what he said was that the good that we could extract from that event, like however horrible, is to try to become aware of impermanence, aware of the constant change of reality, to rehearse thinking about it daily, so that we can become more attuned to the fragility of life, and to give our life a clear purpose and agency, to realize that we could have been in that building, and that we could die tomorrow. And so how do we want to live our lives today? He asked us what's the most valuable thing that we could be doing with our time for our own benefit and for the benefit of everyone around us. And I wouldn't say his teaching immediately made me feel better, but after hearing his advice, I started meditating on this topic a lot. And when I started teaching meditation, it was one of the topics that consistently resonated with people. And one of the big benefits of this meditation is that it requires absolutely no belief, no metaphysics. It's impermanence, it's a cold, hard look at reality as it is. And in many ways, it's a beautiful dive also into all the scales of reality. The kind of things you experience if you've ever watched the documentary Powers of 10 or seen Cosmos, either the old one or the new one with Neil deGrasse Tyson. So if you're one of the people watching who's been meditating on impermanence for years, great. But if not, now's maybe a great time to start, with such obvious change before us and with uncertainty ahead. So a lot of people, sometimes it's said that Buddhism is an invitation. And so you may want to take the rest of the discussion and the meditation today as an experiment or as an invitation to see whether this way of thinking helps your mind the way that it's supposed to. See if reflecting on change in all its forms helps your mind accept reality the way it is, and to be more relaxed and present, and to be a force for positive change with the people and events around you. So let's go into talking about what you actually think about. I'll guide you through an introduction to the topic, and then we'll meditate on it afterwards. So a key realization in reflecting on change is that gross jarring changes occur in the world, like we're seeing right now. When we look at a building, we rarely think that it's going to fall down eventually, but buildings crumble, people lose their jobs, markets crash, new diseases appear. And then also, though, with change, people also meet the love of their life. They get their dream job. They find a perfect place to live. And people discover cures and vaccines. You can read about, and some of us lived through, some of the miraculous change that happened in this area. I remember when AIDS was finally made manageable through drugs after many years, and all of a sudden getting AIDS wasn't a death sentence. And for people much older, they may remember Jonas Salk discovered the vaccine for polio when they were kids, a lot of the baby boomers. And all of a sudden, that terrible illness that was killing, I think, 50,000 or more people a year was ended. So these kind of things are gross changes, and they're the ones we notice, like the big ones happening around us right now. But the realization we want to move toward is that change is actually happening constantly. It's not just something that happens a few times a year with big changes, disasters, or windfalls, the onset of illness, presidential elections. A simple way to think about it in your daily life is to look at your possessions, the things that we buy, like phones and clothes and cars. And these all wear out faster than you think, or they're stolen or lost, or you just get sick of them. And then a common topic about our leaders, whether you love your leaders or whether you despise them, they're always on their way out. In democracies, they'll be voted away in 1 year or 4 years or 8 years. It might be a bit longer for Vladimir Putin, but eventually leaders are replaced with somebody new. A leader might have soaring popularity today, and then one action he does tumbles him from power. And then it's interesting to look at impermanence and change at a subtler level. There's things that we can observe, there's things we can infer, but there's a lot that are new that we only know through scientific insight into the subtler aspects of reality. And then there's others we can also only know through turning the mind inward, through the mind looking at itself through meditative concentration. So science has greatly expanded the beauty of understanding impermanence and the invisible, microscopic levels of change that are happening all the time. Right now the blood coursing through your veins, cells dying and being reborn, metabolizing your breakfast, turning it into energy, and neurons sending signals from your fingertips to your brain and back. And then the jostling, busy world of biochemistry with trillions of molecules bouncing around and combining, metabolizing, sending and receiving messages. And then at the fundamental level of particles that we're all made out of, and everything is made out of zipping electrons and protons and neutrons, that they actually say that these exchange at such a rate that your entire body is replaced subatomically every 7 years, that you're literally not the same person you were physically 7 years ago today. And then there's the mental change that we can observe through meditation, through thoughts, through feelings and emotions. Things constantly appearing and disappearing in our minds. Our moods that seem to shift without our control. Our minds are very busy places. Venerable Kathleen MacDonald, or Venerable Sangye Kadro, who wrote a great book called How to Meditate, said that our minds can be like a train station at rush hour, with the thoughts constantly changing, rushing about, and sometimes faster than we can even track them. And then the last aspect of change is that final last big change, the change at the end of all our lives. When we die, young or old, surrounded by loved ones or alone. And the point isn't to, of course, to make you sad. There'd be no point meditating on these things if that's what it did to you. But doing it in the right way, contemplating all these things in a healthy way, brings you in touch with the constant changing reality of your body and your mind and the world and the people around you. It opens you up to the flexibility and the opportunity and the change when there's any difficult situation. And it also sobers us to the eventual end of everything, that we'll part with our possessions, the places we live, that relationships end, and that our thoughts and perceptions are always changing and evolving. Again, the point of this all isn't nihilistic, and it's certainly not to depress or sadden you at a time that things are difficult. But based on the evidence of meditators for a couple thousand years, embracing change like this, honestly facing reality the way it is, not just from time to time, but reflecting on it every day, brings you to a point that you start to see your everyday experience through the lens of change. And it helps you to be fully present for the people around you, to stay calm in the face of problems, and also to more greatly enjoy life's fleeting pleasures and find the most meaning in everyday life. I think that's one of the surprises of reflecting on change and impermanence, is that in many ways it actually helps you enjoy life more and be present for it. Often when we're enjoying something, we're thinking about the next time we might get it or worrying about running out. But staying aware of impermanence helps you to be present with the experience and really enjoy what's right there before you right now. So that's a little bit of an introduction to the topic. And now you can take a tiny break if you want to readjust yourself, and we'll move into the meditation. But I'll give everybody just a half a minute to adjust your situation if you like. If you know how to meditate, get into your posture if you have a little cushion of some sort, on a couch or on a cushion or seated on a chair. But I'll give you just a half a minute to get into that posture, and then we'll get into the meditation. Okay, so hopefully you're all in your meditation posture. If you're unfamiliar with it, elevating your seat a little bit helps very much because it helps to straighten your spine. You can put your hands on your knees or your right hand atop the left with your thumbs touching. And if you're in a chair, you don't cross your legs. You can just have your feet straight out and down. Whatever feels comfortable to you. And so we usually start a meditation with a motivation. So now you can relax your shoulders. That can often be done by squeezing them up and then letting them go. And relax all the muscles in your face. Tilt your head slightly downward so that you're aimed about 4 or 5 feet down on the floor. And you can half close your eyes if you like, which helps you go inward but stay awake. And we can reflect on a motivation for meditating. One way from the point of view of the topic today is that we'd like to meditate today in order to come to terms with the uncertain, changing nature of reality, to become more calm, more rational, and more present during this challenging time. To be a source of help and happiness and meaning to those around us. And think quietly about your own motivation too. And then for a moment, feel a sense of confidence in your own capabilities, in your own good nature, that your good qualities are your natural ones, the deepest ones, and that disturbing thoughts and emotions are transitory, that your mind is trainable, and that through meditation you can gradually let your natural kindness and warmth and love and generosity shine through and diminish the anger and fear and compulsive desire, which, however annoying, aren't aspects of our true nature. And now just for 2 slow breaths, try to bring all your attention onto your breath, at the breath coming in through your nostrils or at your abdomen, rising and falling. Bring all your attention there and let go of any perceptions and thoughts and feelings and fears and plans. And then we begin by becoming aware of our bodies. So put your mind on the parts of your body one by one. Become aware of your feet, your legs, then your hands, your arms, your torso, your neck, your head, your eyes, your mouth, your nose, your ears, and then all of your skin, the boundary between the outer world and your body's inside. Try to become aware of the change inside your body. Become aware of your heart beating. The blood coursing through your veins, circulating through your entire body once every second. Become aware of the flow of your breath in and out of your lungs. The energy of your nerve impulses from the tips of your fingers and toes and skin to your brain and back. And become aware of the more subtle cellular changes that the living blood and skin and stomach and brain cells are moving and changing, dying and dividing and reproducing. And that all of these are made out of atoms, vibrating, exchanging particles at phenomenal speed. Become aware of yourself at this fundamental level of physics. Just invisible, vibrating energy. And then turn your attention to your mind. Your mind's also composed of parts. And when you watch it, you can see thoughts arise, and perceptions, and feelings. These all ceaselessly changing. So just for a few seconds, watch your mind from a distance and observe how it changes, and also how it seems to change without your control, how thoughts and feelings and perceptions come and go. And yet you do have control as the observer of those thoughts, whether to pull them forward or just let them pass by. And then we bring our attention to the outer world. So without using your eyes, but just with your mind, picture your seat, picture the walls, and the ceiling and the space around you, the objects in the room. Try to see these the way that physics understands them, that they're each buzzing clouds of energetic particles that our senses mistakenly tell us are solid and have color. Think of your possessions. Think of the things that you treasure, that you paid small or large amounts of money for. Your phone. For many of us, it's our prized possession now. Your car, if you're lucky enough to have one. The house you own. Each of these is subject to change. Nothing lasts forever. So visualize these prized possessions of yours as old and faded and broken. Your house eventually worn out and torn down for something new. Your car crushed into a cube of metal. Notice how your feelings change about these objects when we think about their eventual demise. How your attachment is reduced. And then come back to the present to realize that change is happening all the time. Not just when things wear out, not just when they're destroyed, but at every instant. And then think of the people around you. Every one of them was born. So imagine that moment with their mother giving birth. How that person was the most precious one in the world to them. And also remember how everyone we encounter will die. Maybe alone, or maybe with their dear loved ones around them. So our view of people as unchanging, as clearly labeled with some solid notion of their name, like Stephen and Lynn, is inaccurate. Even at this moment, they're constantly changing. They're constantly in flux, just as our own body and mind are. And then think of your relationships to other people. Think of your friendships. Think of your romantic partners, your job and work relationships. And notice how these two are all in flux. That most of us have friends or partners who were once the most important people in our life, who've now become distant acquaintances, in some cases even enemies. But then also, somewhere out there in the world, there may be a stranger who will become our dearest friend, or an intimate partner for the rest of our life. And then even if things don't wear out, relationships don't fall apart, some of us are lucky enough to live very stable lives like that, still our mind changes. The happiness and the pleasure that we experience from objects and people is subject to change. And we can also just become tired or bored with something that once gave us so much joy and excitement. You can see that in your music collection or playlist sometimes. Tens of thousands of songs that you couldn't get enough of at one time and now you don't really want to hear anymore. And then this current pandemic, the stock market crash, they're all reminders of gross, sudden change in the world. And they are bad, they are harmful, but they can help us connect to all the other forms of change that we can become aware of at every moment. But also remember that being aware of change helps us to realize that our current situation is also subject to change. It's also fluid. That when you encounter an unexpected huge change, like we are now with this virus, or changes that we did more or less expect, like the stock market coming down, a recession, and with a mind accustomed to reflecting on impermanence, you can know for sure that things will change, just as they always have. And that when things reach a very bad point, the direction of change is then quite likely for the better, as the world swings through extremes and back to regularity. And then finally, the impermanence of our life is the bookend to any contemplation on change. Again, that even if we live a stable, happy life with few problems and little conflict, even if our possessions don't wear out and we have the same partner for life, eventually we lose these at the end of our life. And contemplating the end of our life like that, accepting it in the context of change, it isn't meant to provoke fear or anxiety, but to help us put all challenges into perspective, to reduce or even eliminate our fear, and let us be present and engaged for the problems and the challenges and the joys that are facing us now and in the future. So now just quietly for a minute, contemplate for a moment on impermanence. This is practice for your own meditation. That you can let anything at all come to mind. Objects, people, relationships, your body, your mind, your thoughts, your regrets, your plans, politicians, this pandemic, and even our civilization itself. Contemplate whatever comes to mind for you, particularly objects of strong emotional attachment or aversion. And try to apply the intellectual reasonings of impermanence, that this intellectual reasoning is a path towards something non-intellectual, experiential. And if you glimpse a clear, strong sense of the ever-changing nature of any of these things, let go of the analysis and then hold your attention firmly on that intangible feeling of realizing impermanence itself. And then inevitably that does fade, and you can come back to the intellectual analysis, analyzing the impermanence of your body or your mind, this pandemic, or another object. And then when that sense of impermanence returns, just focus on it firmly. So just for a minute by yourself, reflect on impermanence. So hopefully reflecting in that way, reflecting on impermanence, helps to let go of fear and anxiety and to accept things as they are and to anticipate and even expect problems and change. To diminish our fear and anxiety so that we can be present for those around us. And remember that whatever is difficult and disturbing in life won't last forever, and that it might even change for the better. And there's no use rejecting it. And also that whatever is beautiful or pleasing also eventually changes and disappears. So we can't expect it to give us permanent, lasting happiness. But when you realize this, paradoxically, it can make us enjoy the impermanent beauty all around us in the world and in our relationships even more. And so at the end of meditation, we usually do something called a dedication. So dedicating all the progress towards seeing reality more clearly that we've made today, so that we might carry those realizations into our day today and into the coming weeks, to be able to bring peace of mind to the huge challenges before us, in the change and the uncertainty that's brought on by this virus. And then also, when you enjoy something pleasurable today, a latte or a piece of cake or a great meal, a walk in the woods, or the touch of your partner, try and be fully present for it. Try and realize that you won't always experience such pleasures, and that it's not likely, but there's a very small chance it's the last time that you do. See if you can enjoy whatever it is that you're enjoying without clinging to it, without planning for the next time. So often, the enjoyment of life's pleasures, the great experiences of life, is ruined by worrying about them ending or by plotting to have them again. So when we recognize that external things can't give us lasting happiness and satisfaction, our attachment to them lessens. And they say that by realizing the true impermanent nature of pleasure, that we actually enjoy things 1,000 times more without unrealistically wishing for them to last forever or to repeat again and again. And so that wraps up the meditation. Now we have a little time for questions and answers. You can go into the comment thread and ask them. If you really want to stay private too, you can send a direct message to the Seichen Link Center. During the real life classes, this is often the most lively part of the class. So it's an experiment to see if that manages to work online. Okay, here's a question. So a question is, how do we know when to give in to impermanence or when to change things? I think that's like the question that when to accept things and when to work to change. It's actually a common criticism of Buddhism, that it might be too passive and that all you're doing is accepting all the difficult things around you. The Dalai Lama himself has said this, that it's one of the things he admires about Christianity, is that it's actively engaged with reducing suffering and opening hospitals and helping the homeless and so on. I think it's a difficult question to answer for anybody, but through the process of coming to know your own mind, I think that's a decision that each of us makes personally. One of my favorite quotes is from someone named Shantideva, a great master who wrote a book called The Bodhisattva's, A Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. And there's a quote in it where he says, if you can do something about a problem, why worry? If you can't do something about a problem, why worry? And that's a quote you can actually think about for years, and it has many, many layers of meaning. For me, it's been helpful in letting go of worry to realize that you can either do something about a problem or can't, and to reflect on that. My wife actually is really annoyed by that quote a lot of times because she says, though, that she's not sure whether she can do something about a problem or not. So that's a reasonable response to it too. But I think that there is you can keep taking that analysis to every level of response. So if you're not sure, that's okay too. And you can accept that and perhaps not do anything for a moment and then reflect. But I think it's up to each of us, but I think Buddhism is definitely not passive. Venerable Rubina Curtin is a great teacher on a more actively engaged type of Buddhism. And I was at a class once where someone asked her, my neighbor keeps parking in my driveway, and I don't know what to do about that. Like, should I just accept it? And she said, being a Buddhism doesn't mean you're a pushover. She said, just go ask them, quite nicely to move their car. So I think that's good. If anyone has that problem of certainly being too passive, or thinking that this way of looking at things is too passive, it's not the case. Another one of my great lamas said, you're more likely to find, highly realized beings out in the world, helping people than, just hiding in a cave meditating. Okay, let's see if there's other questions. I hope that was helpful. Okay. Let's see here. Oh, there's some good questions here. Okay, so Sujata, who's a great meditation leader, asks, would you share some ideas about how to bring this practice into moments when we're feeling challenged by changes happening in real time in our lives? I think that acceptance is very, very important, like acceptance of wherever you are, including acceptance of difficult feelings. I think that's a key one. Like, this technique doesn't mean that you try to shove yourself into a positive, cheerful way of being and put on your hazmat suit and go out and try to help everyone in the world immediately. But I think that it starts with that awareness and acceptance of the change within yourself. So I think for almost all of us, the practice would start by being aware of how we're feeling and thinking, and utterly and completely accepting that, not forcing yourself to change or to be cheery, but accepting the difficult ways you're feeling, accepting that you might feel scared and upset for some time, perhaps. But I think starting with that, especially if you're feeling really strong negative emotions, just accepting those and being present with them helps. But to do it in a meditative way, like to actually sit down and look at your mind from a distance. And again, it's this paradox, because if you find that distance between your feelings, you think, I am feeling scared, I'm feeling anxious, I'm worried, I'm stressed out. If you actually gain that distance and don't become that stress, you realize that you aren't your feelings and your thoughts and your fears, but that you can observe them going through your mind. That, I think, is the first step. I think, and Sujata is very good at guiding people through that type of meditation, actually. So I think that, really gentle acceptance of yourself and where you are in your feelings is important. Realizing that, and also the changeability of it, of course. Looking at your mind and watching that the moods do change. It actually does take effort to continue to hold on, especially to a negative emotion. They don't just sustain themselves. And so to become aware of your mind, and as you accept it, then, perhaps gently to try to steer it in ways that you can be helpful. Okay. Katya asks, how do you avoid feeling sad, depressed, and fearful when thinking about certain aspects of impermanence, your death, and those of your loved ones? So, I think the first step of that is the same answer as we were just discussing, which is, first of all, to accept whatever you're feeling. That there isn't a right way of feeling about these things, but simply to come to terms with those feelings. Like, the fact is, we are going to die, and not thinking about death or denying death causes a whole host of additional problems. The biggest one can be just not making the most of your life. So the purpose of reflecting on death is that, of course, if you do it and it doesn't work, that you think that that reflecting on your death feels very painful and frightening, then don't do it. There's no guarantee that any of these techniques work. The Buddha himself said, try these techniques. If any of them works for you, set it aside, because success is based on personal experience. So if you do try this and it brings up very strong negative emotions, then don't reflect on death, and reflect on the other aspects of impermanence. But start by just acknowledging your feelings in that case. Again, we're at a difficult time, so it may not be the best time to be reflecting on death for a lot of people. But for the purpose of introducing people to this topic and the richness of it, we do go through all of the topics, and I wanted to talk about that biggest aspect of change. And then over time, when you reflect on death enough, it really does help you let go of the trivial conflicts in your life and the trivial pursuits. I think that's the benefit. I think many of us have seen this in our workplaces a lot. You see people arguing, and also you see it out in the world and on television. You really see people caught up with very trivial conflicts. And so remembering that we are all going to die, and also that there's serious illnesses around, helps us to let go of all those little conflicts and little spats that you might have with your partners and friends. So it's an invitation, and if it doesn't work, that's okay. And be gentle with yourself, and acknowledge and accept any negative, difficult feelings you may be happening. Okay. Next question. Let's see who asked this one. Okay, somebody asks, you said the word regularity, going through lots of change and coming back to regularity. Can you expand upon this? Yeah, so I mean, the reason I use that word is that we're at an extreme right now, and we're likely heading more towards the extreme. This is probably the beginning of a trend towards an extreme experience for the world, and a stress on our healthcare system, and a lot of illness. And I certainly hope not, but potentially, a lot worse than that. So regularity is actually just acknowledging that extreme situations don't tend to last. If you look at the stock market, even if you look at the stock market's a great example, because the change tends to happen very, very fast, and then it improves very slowly. One of my very favorite quotes is from Stuart Brandt, who's a hero of mine, who runs something called the Long Now Foundation, this organization to promote long-term thinking. He also created the Whole Earth Catalog. And he said, bad things happen fast, good things happen slowly. And so we're seeing that right now, and that's why it's so shocking. But it's part of why I repeat that to myself all the time, to remember that bad things do tend to happen very fast. Earthquakes, floods, pandemics, stock market crashes. An election, of course, happens like that in the end. And accepting that to return to, regularity is a slow process, but it's one that actually, in many ways happens without you quite realizing it until all of a sudden things are normalized again. So I guess that's what I meant by coming to regularity. It's just to think of the extremes, extreme positive experiences, extremely negative experiences, and then the experience in the middle. Okay, we have another question. I hope that's helpful. And if it's not, feel free to comment more that the question was not, that the answer was not helpful. And if you have any further ones, I'm not really the kind of teacher that you'd see in a highly trained Tibetan Lama, but I'm more like a friend, like everybody watching today, and it's nice to talk about these things together. Okay, question 4. Let's see. You frequently describe Buddhism as an invitation. Can you talk more about how you feel this is a helpful way to think about Buddhism? Yeah, so many people say Buddhism isn't even a religion, that it's more of a philosophy or a way of looking at the world. And when you look at what the Buddha himself said too, that's exactly what he said. In fact, he waited for a while to say anything because he wasn't, I guess you don't know exactly what he was thinking, but perhaps he didn't, it was hard to translate an experience that is beyond words and concepts itself into words and concepts. And so he taught this thing called the Dharma, but what he said is try these things. These are empirically testable techniques, and the techniques are philosophies. They're ways of looking at the world, like we've just said today. Impermanence isn't just a meditation. The purpose of the meditation is to gradually ingrain a philosophy of seeing the world as impermanent, changeable, flexible, and going about the world, going about your day and your time in the world with that mentality. Steve Jobs was a Buddhist, actually. He had a reputation for being mean sometimes, so maybe he didn't study the compassion as much. But he seemed very aware of the impermanent aspect of reality, and he used to say that it's each of our jobs to put a little dent in the universe. That we each have a huge capacity to change the world ourselves. And I think you see this in individual people. Certain people who fully realize their capacity as humans are able to create great changes in the world. And so I think that is one of the invitations, as an invitation to see the world as changeable and to see yourself as an agent of change. And to try this for a while. Of course, if you tried it and it was so horrible, you never want to try it again, that's fine. But in general, you want to try these things for a long period of time, a sustained period of time on a daily basis, and see how they affect your life. And then if it ends up being beneficial after a few months or after a few years, stick with it. And if not, again, the Buddha himself said, then just set it aside, put it back on the shelf, as one of my teachers said. So that's the way I guess I understand Buddhism as an invitation. It's also been changed many times as it has been adapted to different cultures. Like the Tibetan form was adapted to its culture, but now Buddhism is being adopted into the West with more of a scientific foundation, and one that's less reliant on certain beliefs like karma and rebirth and things that aren't big parts of our culture. Okay, here's a question from Votan Min Tu. How do you generate positive mental states during meditation? Okay, that's a great question. We only did that a tiny bit today. This was very kind of grounding meditation in some of the more difficult aspects of reality. But so much of Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism is about that. And those are really quite nice parts of meditation that you often do at the beginning of every meditation session. In general, it's through thinking about good things and heartwarming things. The meditating on love is one of my favorite meditations. So an easy way to do that is you think of somebody you love. Ideally someone you love without complexity. Sometimes your partner is difficult because you have many different emotions. So if you have a child, thinking about the child can be quite easy sometimes. Or a pet. Actually, a pet can sometimes be one of the best objects. And so thinking about someone or something you really love is one way to generate a positive mental state. Another is thinking of people that you really admire in the world. Of course, if you're like religious or you have teachers, thinking about them helps a lot. Like our teacher Geshe Dakpa, I think about him, a person who dedicated his entire life to benefiting others, who left his culture, who left his country, and who's living, here in the Bay Area, just to benefit others. When he would probably be, much happier holding hands with his friends and speaking Tibetan and so on. So sacrificing your whole life for others, thinking about those people is quite heartwarming. And then there's also a process called rejoicing, which they say is a very easy, very lazy way of meditating. You don't even have to sit on a cushion. You can, if you're tired when you come home from work or something, I guess we're all working at home now, but you can kick back on your couch. And an easy way to meditate when you're tired is rejoicing. So you just think about all the good things that other people did, ones that they did today that you know of, things that you witnessed personally, or you can think about things you heard of. You can go search online. Our news is really biased towards the negative, but really, it's most likely there are way more positive things that happen every day with all the parents and nurses and doctors. That would be a very good one for today, I think. Thinking about all of the incredible kindness and sacrifice of all the doctors and nurses, helping sick people, putting themselves in great danger. Many of them have been infected by this virus through helping others, and they accept that risk and accept the disease that comes upon them because they really want to help others. So those are some ways. In general, think of things that are heartwarming. You can even watch like internet videos. They did that at a compassion one-day intensive that I took recently with the Dalai Lama's translator, Thubten Jinpa. They played a heartwarming story about an old man whose wife had died, who was really lonely, and then he just crossed paths with this little 5-year-old girl in the supermarket, and she just reached out to him and said, "Old man, you look lonely," and gave him a big hug and a kiss. And then they became these amazingly good friends. So I think stories like that are great to track down and pursue. There's a lot of them. To get yourselves out of the negativity in the media. Obviously, it's really good to stay informed right now, but then also to seek out the positive stories if you're trying to generate some warm, positive energy for yourself. And then, of course, the normal things like spending time with your friends and family, if you're in a house with your family, or maybe now over FaceTime and video with your friends and so on. Okay, let's see, another question. What do we do when we feel contemplating impermanence is too much or feels like it's overwhelming? So an easy answer is just stop. This form of meditation is just an invitation. So if it feels overly distressing to you, don't do it. I can attest to the benefits of it myself, but I can also attest to how disturbing it did feel sometimes and at the start. So just be gentle on yourself. There are many different forms of meditation. This is an introduction to one of them. There are many dozens, actually even hundreds of subtle variations. So if this form of meditation doesn't work for you, there's no point to try to keep forcing it upon yourself. Mindfulness meditation is extremely popular today, and a great way to simply become present through watching your breath, through watching your thoughts. There's tons of sources for those types of meditations and apps that teach them and so on. And then these positive meditations like meditating on love, meditating on kindness. Gratitude is a very, very good practice. Just reflecting on everything good in your life, all the things that you have to be thankful for. So again, I wouldn't, especially at this time, I wouldn't push this topic on you. But perhaps, if it's too much for now, come back to it later, because in general, it really does make you present and capable and prepared for all the change that's always coming in life. Okay, that was the last question. If anybody has any more questions, I'll give you another, 30 seconds or a minute. And if not, we'll end. Very open to comments too on how this went for people and how to improve. And I wish everybody a good day and health and safety through this time. Thanks a lot for listening. Thanks for your patience with any mistakes that I made or awkwardness. And I welcome any comments on how to improve. See you later.